Dave, pardon my French, but I think it's utter bullshit the way coaches are being handled in this league these days, man. It's just so different. The shelf life is so short. I think you guys should chase every penny possible. What do you make of the state in coaching? Like the numbers are staggering when you read into them. The last year alone, how many guys have lost their jobs?
Yeah, they are. I mean, when you look at, I'm sure everybody looks at their own personal situation, and you look, you're 2.5 years into your job, and you're one of the top 10 in terms of tenure in the league. That it puts a little bit extra stress and strain on the position, but that's the position. Let's be honest. That's the position. That's the role. I go back to one of I thought Pete had a great quote during the NHL playoffs. In terms of the expectations in terms of growing relationships, building relationships, having those strong relationships in kind of the new age world. It's difficult to do that. And, when you go through a year where there's ups, downs, struggles, inconsistencies, it makes it even more challenging to expand those relationships and grow those relationships. In a perfect world, we'd all love to have more time, but we know the reality of it is that in the majority of the cases, it's you're working on a very short-term basis to make sure that you're getting the most out of everybody. Sometimes that works against relationships.
Mm-hmm. Dave, obviously this being a Leaf-centric show, we want to ask you a little bit about your time behind the Leafs bench. So I'm curious, just in your couple seasons you spent working with Sheldon Keefe, what do you look back on? What do you remember of what it was like to work with him?
Keefer's a hell of a coach. He's very, very well prepared. He's a guy that he looks beyond, so the obvious at times. I believe in his mind, he's not afraid to innovate, to try to look to new things. And certainly, the situation, I look back to the situation that he came into the Leafs with. Obviously, he'd been with the organization. He had strong relationships throughout the organization, but that still doesn't make that the process of transitioning from the American Hockey League and the Marlies to the Toronto Maple Leafs in late November. And I thought he did a tremendous job with that, with players, with staff, overall. So that was my, really, other than, getting to know him a little bit in training camp earlier that year, that was my first opportunity spending time with Kiefer. And I was really impressed how he was able to handle all of that under the stress and strain of being the Toronto Maple Leafs head coach. Tremendous success throughout every regular season. Some really, some difficult losses in the playoffs, of which I was part of two of them with the Columbus and the Montreal series. But I've got a lot of respect for Sheldon. I thought he handled his time there very, very well, especially as a young coach growing through it.
Yeah, it's funny you bring those up, Dave, because I mentioned earlier on I was actually the radio host on Fan 590 for those two series. The two seasons I was with Sportsnet were the Columbus and the Montreal series. Such a unique time, man. Like when we think back on this, even in your coaching career, when you think back in 20 years, just coaching during a pandemic, what was that like?
It was, it's something that I'm sure we'll never experience again. We all look back on it with different perspectives, but with a ton of challenges. It is, it's really surreal when you look back and you think of some of the things that, that we did during that time, during the pandemic, coming back that first year for the playoffs, in the way that the league did. I give the league a lot of credit. They found a way to pull it off in a real, at the end of the day, a real positive manner, but it was challenging. You just went through your business day in and day out. And I found as it went on longer is when it really got challenging. You're being tested twice a day. You come in on game day and you're tested that morning, you're tested the next night, and then, that night before the game. Just so many strange things that are not part of our daily life. And then the challenges I think that it threw on everybody, especially individually, was the amount of time that you spent on your own. You spent away from your families. You spent, just doing things, in a way that you weren't really, you're not used to. So there was a ton of different challenges there. Would I say it was a great experience? No, I wouldn't want to do it again, but it was an experience in all of our lives that I'm sure we all learn from and move forward. Pretty strange time.
Yeah. Dave, I'm curious too, because obviously you weren't necessarily exposed to the typical version of the Toronto market in terms of just the amount of people in the building, and the interaction with media during that time is a bit different. But just when you look back, what was it like being in that pressure cooker for a couple of years?
Yeah, it's a different world. It really is. Being part of the Toronto Maple Leafs, being in Toronto on a daily basis. It's the media scrutiny. Again, I go back to Keefe. I thought he handled that extremely well. We can always go through and pick our pressers that we'd like to do over again, and I'm sure he's got a couple of them. But I thought he handled himself extremely well in that environment, the fan environment in the city, and the surrounding communities, the importance of it, right? We experienced, my family and myself experienced it, for the first several months until COVID hit in March. We lived out in Oakville. Our kids are in school, regular family life. So we full on experienced it during that time, where we missed out as a family and as a group, and really, really understanding and being part of it was playoff time, right? Mm-hmm. Which would have been, that's, in many respects, that's the most telling time, and the part that you want to be a part of, full go with, full fan force, full media attention.
It's pretty sweet. Matt and I are both from Oakville as well, so we know where you're coming from on that front. I know a lot of the coaches do end up living out there. So obviously the big question in these parts, the core four, I think obviously you had the unique perspective of being behind the bench, being in that room. What was it like to work with those guys on a daily basis?
First thing I'd say is they're great people. And I really believe that anybody that's dealt with them over, the past few years and watched them grow up and watched their careers grow, really has to agree with me. They're great people. They're all four really good teammates. They're under such scrutiny. And I believe they own that, and they should own that, right? They're becoming veteran athletes, veteran players in this league, and they have the ability, both mentally, physically, to handle all of those things. For me, it's always special when you get on the ice with world-class players and watch the way they can go about things, the way they can do things, the routines that work for them. Certain things, every player has to figure out what works exactly for them and why it works. All the while they got to open themselves up a little bit to what the team needs on that particular day, if it's a day of practice as well, right? And they have to have the perceptive abilities to be able to know what the team needs as well. And, I believe you look through those, that group, and those guys have that. They're under immense strain, right, in the Toronto market to produce, to win, and ultimately to win a Stanley Cup. We all know how hard that is. It's extremely hard to make the playoffs, extremely hard to win a round, really hard to get through 4 rounds, as we all can understand. So it's a group. I know they're under, there's a ton of scrutiny. There's a ton of debate as to should they be broken up, should somebody be moved. Those are all great debates to have, but you also, I think we all have to understand how difficult that is. If you're going to consider moving an elite player in this league, what is the end result? And I think those are the things that always, at the end of the day, become evaluated, and they're a big part of the decisions that are made.
That's where I wanted to lead the conversation and steer the conversation. And again, it's always great to talk to an NHL head coach. Like, what happens behind the scenes when a conversation gets this loud? Obviously on Mitch Marner, but even Craig Berube, we'll talk about him coming up as well. But like, just what happens behind the scenes when it comes to a coach? And do you feel like it could be time for a significant change in this market?
Well, it's easy for me to make a prediction there. I'm now removed 3 years from the organization. So, one of the things, I can give you opinions. The one thing that I don't have is any consequences with my opinions. And there's no short-term consequences. There's no long-term consequences. So what I would say from my perspective as a coach, my first thought process is always, I would be very careful, in moving an elite player in this league. Great players in this league are very hard to come by. And, I know the core four there are spoken about a lot. They all have different abilities. They all bring different personalities. They all bring different pieces to the table when you're looking at how things fit together, how roles fit together, how chemistry comes together. And I believe you have to consider all of those things, when you discuss, breaking up a group that truly does get along well. I believe truly is growing. And, from what I now see from the outside over the last 3 years, continues to grow. It's really hard to stand pat, and I understand that, especially for a fan base, because you want to see progress in June and July. You want things to look improved on the roster, but the reality is sometimes the improvement is not shown or actually proven until you get into the rigors of an NHL schedule and season, and that year's group has a chance to find their roles, find their chemistry, and find the rhythm as to what they're going to be as a team.
So, Dave, I think it makes sense now to shift gears and talk about the person who maybe is going to try to help them get that chemistry, and that's Craig Berube. And I'm curious for you, what do you think the impact is going to be when you bring in a personality like his? Obviously, it's a little different from Sheldon's, and Craig is more of a man of few words when it comes to the media, but also he's known as that go to battle for him type of coach. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that hire, and how do you think it'll change the team's identity?
Yeah, I've never been in a dressing room or on a staff with the Chiefs, so I don't know exactly how he's going to approach things. I don't know exactly how he's going to bring a message into a room. I haven't been in one of those meetings, but I believe it'll be direct. There will be no gray areas. When I watch his teams play, you look at the way his teams in St. Louis played, and there is a real distinct structure there. There is distinct expectations. As an opposing coach, what's coming at you. It appears to me that he just believes, he's going to have his guys do exactly what they do. You're going to know what's coming at you, and they're just going to do it better than you can defend it, or you can counter it. And that's what I see out of Craig in terms of the way he approaches things. Simple, direct, black and white. Seems to be a very good communicator. And again, I don't know Craig really well personally, but in all of my interactions with him, just an awesome guy. Awesome guy. And I hear that from past players that have played for him. Guys love him. He's hard on him. He pushes them. He's very demanding, but guys love him. And I think when that respect and that, that factor of trust and love comes in there, from coach to player, this is now when you're talking, that's where chemistry comes in. That's where trust in roles come in. That's where buy-in comes in. So everybody has a different way of doing it. For sure his way is distinct.
It is. And suppose the mentality is what people are looking for. Not to say it wasn't there under Sheldon Keefe, but obviously many kicks at the can when it came to the Leafs and trying to get them to that next level. But just curious, what was the conversation like in the room? Was the Stanley Cup ever brought up? Is it ever brought up in general? Because I think obviously to have the end game in sight is important too.
Yeah, I think everybody's a little bit different. For me, there has to be realism to everything that you're talking about. You can, in this league, you can talk about winning a Stanley Cup on day number one, but if you're realistically a team that's trying to build and grow and, you want to be competitive and become a playoff team, well, you should talk about that first. If you're one of the team, there's very few teams you go through. There's 16 playoff teams, right? Probably at the start of the year, we can pick 4 or 5 on each side. Each in each conference. Say, I'm pretty sure these teams are going to be in. They've got to, unless something goes drastically wrong. These are going to be playoff teams. When you're in that grouping, I think that's the time to begin talking about, okay, what is our purpose on a daily basis? Your focus probably turns to your process as much as anything at that point in time, not necessarily every individual result. You may have a positive result one night, but the process wasn't good enough. So you focus on improving that process and vice versa. So yes, I believe there's a time and a place to talk about where you're going, what that goal is. And if your end goal is a Stanley Cup that year, it should be spoken about in whatever way, you determine to bring that to your team as a coach. that's something you can speak to, because you have to know where you're going. You have to know what your goal is and what you're trying to accomplish in order to now build that year and try to achieve that goal.
Make sure to check out more of our content right here on the Leafs Nation YouTube page. We got long form interviews, we got clips, we got epic rants by Jay Roseau. We simply have it all. And don't forget, you can find out much more at theleafsnation.com. Thanks so much for watching.